Tonight on KREM 2, one final debate before voters decide who will represent Eastern Washington in Congress.
With longtime incumbent Kathy McMorris Rogers retiring, someone new will represent the 5th District for the first time in 20 years. After a crowded primary race, Republican Michael Baumgartner and Democrat Carmela Conroy now face off in the general election.
Tonight, we hear directly from the candidates on issues important to voters in Eastern Washington, including the economy, immigration, abortion, and wildfires. This is the KREM 2 5th District Congressional Debate.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us here on KREM 2. Tonight, the candidates for Washington's 5th Congressional District will debate for the final time before voters have the final say. I'm Whitney Ward.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Mark Hanrahan. We are the moderators of tonight's debate.
And we are joined by the two candidates, Republican Michael Baumgartner and Democrat Carmela Conroy. Thank you both for being here tonight.
Mr. Baumgartner served as a Washington state senator for 8 years and is currently the Spokane County treasurer. Ms. Conroy served as a U.S. Foreign Service officer for 24 years and before that worked as a Spokane County deputy prosecuting attorney.
They are running to be the representative in Congress for Washington's 5th Congressional District. The district covers much of eastern Washington, including the counties of Ferry, Stevens, Pend Oreille, Lincoln, Spokane, Whitman, Walla Walla, Columbia, Garfield, and Asotin, along with parts of Adams and Franklin counties.
Before we get started, we want to share the ground rules of tonight's debate, which both candidates have agreed to follow. They both will get 1 minute each for opening and closing statements. The debate questions will be broken into several topics important to eastern Washington voters.
Each candidate will receive 1 minute and 30 seconds to answer the initial question on that topic. We will then ask follow-up questions, and each candidate will receive 1 minute to answer those follow-ups. We will alternate who goes first as we transition from topic to topic.
Our goal with this debate is to help voters get a clear idea of each candidate's vision for eastern Washington. To achieve that goal, we have asked Mr. Baumgartner and Ms. Conroy to focus on what they can bring to Congress based on their experience and to refrain from negative personal attacks.
We will start now with opening statements. We did hold a coin toss prior to tonight's debate. Ms. Conroy will go first. Ms. Conroy, you have 1 minute.
Whitney and Mark, KREM 2 News, and everybody in the viewing audience, thank you so much for having us here tonight. This is a terrific opportunity for us to educate ourselves at this once-in-a-generation opportunity to choose who will fill this open seat to represent us in Congress. I'm a third-generation Eastern Washingtonian, a third-generation dues-paying union member, and I've got almost 3 decades of apolitical public service experience behind me. My goals, should you choose me to represent you in Congress, will be to reinstate our personal freedoms that have been under attack, to address affordability for regular working people, and also to find common sense solutions to our shared challenges. And that means working across the aisle with anybody who's serious about solving challenges. And I look forward to tonight's debate. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Baumgartner, you have 1 minute.
Well, thank you. Thank you to KREM 2 and to my opponent, Carmela Conroy, and to all the viewers at home. It's just a privilege to get to run for office in our wonderful country. The people of Eastern Washington know me as the son of Eastern Washington. I was born in Pullman and grew up in Colton. My mother was 43 years the best kindergarten teacher in Eastern Washington, and my dad was a professor of forestry at Washington State University. I was privileged to meet my wife in Afghanistan on an Afghan government counter-narcotics team, and we now have 5 young children. The oldest is 13, the youngest is 4. And it's for those 5 kids and for all the kids across Eastern Washington that I'm running for Congress. I want them to have their chance at the American dream. And I just refuse to accept that they're going to have an America that's unsafe, the political divisiveness, communities overrun by drugs, and a border that's unsecure. So I look forward to hopefully getting the chance to go to Congress. It's been an absolute privilege to be a state senator and the county treasurer. And hopefully it'll be a great honor to be your next member of Congress.
Thank you. We now want to get to our first topic, which is the economy. A recent poll from the Pew Research Center found the economy is the top issue for voters in this election. Inflation has driven up prices on everything from food to housing to transportation. So what would you do to ensure that families in Eastern Washington can afford to live here? Mr. Baumgartner, you have 1:30.
Well, thank you. Inflation is an absolute critical issue. Anybody that goes to the grocery store, especially when you have a young family, the price of groceries now versus 4 years ago is just astounding. And I hear it all the time, and I see it at the treasurer's office. Regularly I'll have senior citizens come in to my office that feel like they can't make their property tax payments and that the government is just asking so much of them. So to bring those costs down, what we need to do, first and foremost, is rein in the reckless government spending that has pushed costs up and contributed to inflation. And we also really need to look at the regulatory burden that government policies are having on things like owning a home or starting a small business. Here in the state of Washington, nearly $150,000 in the cost of new home construction is simply because from government regulation, primarily in the environmental, labor, and building code areas. And so government can do a lot of things just to bring prices down. And one of the things I'm hopeful for when we get to Congress, we'll really take a scalpel to the regulatory state and try to bring down some of those government-imposed policies that are costing folks at home so much.
All right, thank you very much. Ms. Conroy, you have 1:30.
Thank you. We've really got two economies going on. We've got record profits for corporations in the United States. We've got record stock market highs. But for the majority of people, they just can't afford housing and childcare and even things as simple as food. So there are a couple of things we can do. Part of it is that the Fed is doing its job to try to bring interest rates down in order to help bring inflation down. But the government could be doing more. We know that one of the reasons that there are record-breaking profits is because corporations took advantage of supply chain interruptions and felt like they could charge people extra just because they wouldn't notice and they wouldn't blame the corporations. So breaking up monopolies, making sure that there isn't too much market power that companies can abuse in order to extract extra profits from people. We can also crack down on tax cheats and funding the IRS enforcement arm. We know every dollar that goes to IRS enforcement comes back in $12 to the U.S. Treasury. So we definitely need to address those costs. Restoring the child care tax credit would be one way that we could do that so that working families trying to get their kids through school can use that money to make things a little bit easier to pay the bills.
All right, thank you. And we will now move on to our first follow-up question, again related to the economy. And as a reminder, candidates will have 1 minute to answer these follow-up questions. In our region, healthcare and education are two main drivers of the economy. So if elected, how would you diversify and support job growth? Mr. Baumgartner, you have 1 minute.
Well, it's a great question. One of the favorite things I worked on in the state Senate was regarding health care, and we did it in a bipartisan fashion, Republicans and Democrats working together. And that was to bring a new medical school here to Spokane. There was a really stupid 100-year-old law that gave the University of Washington a monopoly on medical education. The UW didn't want to give up that monopoly, but I remember meeting with WSU President Elson Floyd down at Churchill's Steakhouse when he asked me to quarterback the WSU Med School bill, and we whipped him in Olympia like the Cougs just whipped the Huskies in the Apple Cup and got a medical school. In fact, we have 2 medical schools now here in Spokane, and that's great because we need doctors. We need more access to rural medicine. And so if I get to Congress, I'll continue to support those medical schools so that everyone can have a doctor that needs one here in Eastern Washington.
All right, Ms. Conroy, you have 1 minute.
Thank you. Healthcare and education are two huge fields that we have out here, and we've actually got plenty of jobs for people. The healthcare industry complains that they can't get enough folks out here. So the medical school, the nursing school, the pharmacy school, all those things help. We've also got Affordable Care Act money that's coming in that's making behavioral health care more available and affordable to people. But we need to do more to make sure that rural folks and veterans have access to the health care that they need. So making sure that the medical record system at the VA hospital here in Spokane and in Walla Walla is replaced with a system that doesn't kill our vets, and making sure that we've got flexibility in our rural clinics, which are being overwhelmed, especially by women and girls seeking health care from neighboring Idaho.
Thank you. We want to change topics now and turn to the issue of immigration and border security. It's something you both have touched on as part of your campaigns. Each candidate will have 1 minute and 30 seconds to answer the first question. Ms. Conroy, you'll be going first. This past year, lawmakers worked on but failed to pass a bipartisan immigration bill. What do you think the solution is, and what can you do as a member of Congress?
The solution is definitely to pass a border security bill as fast as we can. Republican Senator Jim Lankford of Oklahoma drafted a bill. Both houses were prepared to follow through on it, and then the then presumed Republican nominee for president announced that he didn't want that to be solved. And so Republicans in the House and in the Senate, unfortunately, decided to tank Senator Lankford's draft bill, and that was terribly unfortunate. We definitely need to put country over party and secure all of our borders, not just the southern border, to make sure that the people and the things that we want to come in, because immigration as well as trade is so important to our economy, but we also need to secure our borders and keep out the people and the things that threaten our security. As a Foreign Service officer, my very first job at the U.S. Consulate General in Auckland, New Zealand, was to screen people 3,000 miles away from our borders to make sure that nobody got on a plane that shouldn't be on a plane. And so this is something that I've spent my entire life pursuing, national security, and I look forward to putting that expertise to work in Congress.
Thank you. Mr. Baumgartner, you have 1:30 as well.
Yeah, I think the unsecured southern border is really the highest threat facing our country and the top priority of Congress to address. I had the opportunity to visit the southern border some months ago, and we went down there with some Border Patrol agents, and what we saw was in the middle of the night, about 3 in the morning, some drug cartels from the Mexican side dropped up some migrants, and they walked right around where the border wall ends and came into the country and then declared themselves to be refugees, and then entered the catch and release refugee program of the current Biden administration. And before I went down to the border, I talked to sheriffs and law enforcement all across eastern Washington, and single one of them said the biggest problem in their communities is the fentanyl that's pouring over over that border. So what we need to do is we need to be sympathetic to refugees, but we need to return to the Trump era policies of adjudicating refugee status in Mexico. Remain in Mexico was so important because both my wife and I have worked with refugees. I did it in Mozambique in between going to WSU and Harvard. We're sympathetic to refugees, but there's quite frankly just a number of people that are abusing the goodness of America coming into the country. And it's bringing not only drugs in, but is absolutely a national security threat from potential terrorists infiltrating that border as well, too. So that'll be job number one on day one if I do make it to Congress, and I'm absolutely committed to securing that southern border.
Thank you. A follow-up now on immigration. Would you be willing to work across party lines to try to reach a solution? Ms. Conroy, you have 1 minute.
Thank you. I would absolutely work across party lines in the interest of our national security. As I said before, there was a perfectly good bipartisan bill, probably the toughest border security bill that we've seen presented in Congress, or that could have been presented in Congress in over 30 years. And unfortunately, one side of the aisle decided that at the direction of the leader of their party, they would not even present that bill to a vote. And I think it's terribly unfortunate because there were Democrats as well as Republicans who were very disappointed that one extreme position drove that very good bill away from the floor so that problem couldn't be solved just as quickly as possible. And I would work to solve problems as quickly as we could with anybody who is serious about security the way that I am.
Thank you. Mr. Baumgartner?
Yeah, the fundamental problem with the Lankford bill was that it didn't do anything about catch and release as migrants come into the U.S. It didn't focus on the return in Mexico problem. Even Senator Lankford now admits that his bill was insufficient. But yeah, when it comes to working across the aisle, that's my entire experience in the state legislature. You know, while we did have the majority in the state Senate as Republicans, Democrats had the majority in the House and in the governor's seat. So every bill that I've ever had passed as a legislator, and there were a lot, like the WSU Medical School bill, always had Democrat support in the House and in the governor's seat. So I have a lot of experience working across the aisle, and I think we'll be successful at that as well, too. We've already had calls and discussions with other members of the Washington State delegation that works in D.C., and I'm optimistic that we'll be able to work together. Because it shouldn't be about whether you're a Republican or a Democrat. It should be about ideas and policies and saving this great nation of ours.
It is important to us that this debate cover the topics and issues that matter the most to voters here in Eastern Washington. And to ensure this, we reached out to several community members and had them ask their own questions.
So our first community question is coming from Eastern Washington farmer and rancher Bridget Kuhn. Let's take a listen.
I'm Bridget Kuhn, first Vice President of Washington Farm Bureau, the largest agricultural organization in our state. Our family farms hay and raises beef cattle near the little town of Benge in the 5th Congressional District. By the numbers, Washington loses an average of 2 farms per day, underscoring the urgent need to pass a new farm bill. But Congress remains deadlocked on this critical legislation. If elected, how would you reach across the aisle to break that stalemate and ensure the timely passage of a farm bill that supports our rural communities?
Mr. Baumgartner, you have 1 minute and 30 seconds to answer the question.
Yeah, it's a great question, and let me say it's great to see Bridget, and I'm very proud to be endorsed by the Washington State Farm Bureau. And for someone that grew up as a little boy in the wheat farming town of Colton, Washington, and my first job was taking plastic Cougar football cups and filling them up with Kool-Aid and selling them to farmers going out to harvest. I care a lot about our rural areas. The Farm Bill is extremely important, and I've already had discussions with a number of folks that are wheat farmers about how do you work a farm bill. Was speaking with Regent Blankenship from WSU, has significant experience working farm bills, and he talked about how you have to build an alliance with the wheat farmers in Kansas and North Dakota, in Montana, to bring that bill home. And then you also have to reach across the aisle to the Senate as well too, because the farm bill isn't just about wheat, which we care a lot about here. There's also a lot of issues of peanuts and cotton that the folks down south. And then, as I think people know, the farm bill is also combined with poverty food aid for our urban areas. So it really is a big bipartisan bill that has a lot of sausage making that goes into it. But I'm absolutely committed to standing up for folks in rural eastern Washington, because those are my roots. And I'm very optimistic that we'll get a great farm bill if I am fortunate enough to make it to Congress.
All right. Thank you very much. Ms. Conroy, you have 1:30 as well.
Thank you. My grandparents met at a wheat harvest down in the Palouse, and I had the opportunity to work on my great aunt and uncle's wheat farm out in Lind when I was in high school. So it felt like a really amazing jump to make from that background to working at the U.S. Embassy in Japan with Ambassador Tom Foley in the late 1990s. And I was always so proud, because he was so proud that when we hosted official dinners, he would make a point of letting our guests know that a lot of the bounty on that table came from his home state of Washington State, and that made me proud too. So we haven't had a new farm bill since 2018, and it's absolutely imperative that we get one passed. The Farm Bill's meant to last for 5 years, and we need to have things like crop insurance, because even though the weather is not predictable, government ought to be able to do its business and be predictable. Export market access is incredibly important for Eastern Washington farmers, and that needs to be provided as well. Also, we need to provide support for climate adaptation, and there's some fantastic programs at WSU that help farmers do that, and we need to make sure that the MAGA movement does not get to take advantage of the lapse in the Farm Bill to take away all of these things, which is threatened by Project 2025.
Thank you. Our next topic is abortion and reproductive rights. Ms. Conroy, you'll be answering this question first.
This question comes from a high school student here in Spokane. Let's take a listen.
My name is Natasha Velarde, and I'm a student at North Central High School. Given the ongoing debates over reproductive rights in the U.S., what specific policies would you support to ensure access to reproductive health care, and how do you plan to balance these policies with respect for individual autonomy and moral or religious beliefs?
Ms. Conroy, you have 1:30.
Thank you. I was raised in a Catholic household, and we were taught that human life is sacred from the womb to the tomb. And I still believe that. And I also believe that intimate decisions about who we marry, when we marry, whether to start a family, and with whom we start a family have to be left up to us as individuals. That's part of the freedom that we are guaranteed by our Constitution. And I thought that it was heartbreaking when the Dobbs decision came out, and I realized that the rights that were guaranteed from when I was 10 years old onward were taken away from young women in our nation. And we are seeing the impact of that with horrifying stories from states like Georgia and Texas, where women and girls are being forced to carry their rapist baby to term. where women are bleeding out in hospital parking lots because doctors aren't confident that they are sick enough to intervene and end a miscarriage. And so I would work very hard to restore a national right to freedom of choice, including the right to access an abortion, and that is a decision that the patient should be able to make with her doctor, free of interference from any politician or judge.
All right, thank you very much. And Mr. Baumgartner, you have 1:30 as well.
Thank you. Well, it's great to see the question from the young lady at North Central High School. I have two middle schoolers at the IST science program at North Central, so it's fun to see and see there. I'm a pro-life Catholic. But I'm also someone that has sworn an oath to the Constitution in a previous career, and somebody that thinks, frankly, that abortion isn't mentioned in the Constitution. And as such, it's an issue for the states. So I don't plan on when I go to Congress of being particularly active in the abortion discussions, because that's better dealt with at the local and state level. Now, there's been some word games played because it is a hot topic issue in election season about what things do or don't support. So let me just be absolutely clear. I'm not going to Congress to change any abortion laws. And at the state level, those states and their people that are making those decisions, I hope they do allow exceptions for things like rape and incest and the health of the mother. But that's up for people in those communities to make their decision. That's not a decision that the Congressman Baumgartner from Eastern Washington is going to be making. So I hope that clears up any misconceptions or distortions that are going around about this important issue.
All right, thank you. And we do have a follow-up on this topic. Since the Supreme Court struck down Roe v. Wade, Eastern Washington has seen an influx of women from other states seeking abortions and other reproductive services. In fact, a study from UW Medicine found there is now an average 1-week delay for all patients, including those here in the state. So what would you do in response to the increased demand for reproductive services, and how can you help ensure that all patients can get timely care? Ms. Conroy, you have 1 minute.
Well, as I said, what I would do would be to work for nationwide access to abortion so that women did not have to travel from state to state to find the necessary life-saving health care that they need. And I think that it is disingenuous for my opponent to say that he just wouldn't vote if the issue came up before the Congress. He's never trained as a lawyer. He apparently hasn't read the part of the Constitution that says in the 9th Amendment and 10th Amendment that there are privacy rights, there are rights reserved to individuals that are not mentioned in the Constitution, and also that rights that are not, powers that are not given to the federal government or to the state government are reserved to the people themselves. And I would work in Congress to get those rights restored and the whole range of privacy rights, and make sure that the Dobbs decision did not work in any place in the United States to prevent people from enjoying the rights they deserve and that they received in the Roe versus Wade and decisions since then.
All right, thank you. Mr. Baumgartner, you have 1 minute.
Well, we certainly need to make sure that people have accessible health care. And we should certainly have sympathy for anybody facing the challenging decision of what to do with a pregnancy. And that's why one of the things that I support, and hopefully Republicans and Democrats can support, are things like crisis pregnancy centers, so that anyone facing that decision has the knowledge that they will be supported whatever decision they make. So we need to create a culture of life here across America, and we need to make sure that would-be mothers don't feel abandoned or alone in this decision making. We need more support for young families, things like the child tax credit and health care support, so that people can make the decision that is right for them. But, again, on this issue, and we get asked about it a lot, I don't think abortion is a federal issue. It's a state and local issue, and I think that's where these decisions will rest.
All right, thank you. And quickly, in just 15 seconds, please tell us, if a national abortion ban bill came to Congress, how would you vote on it? Ms. Conroy?
I would vote against a national abortion ban.
And Mr. Baumgartner?
Yeah, I would also vote against a national abortion ban. It's a state and local issue.
Thank you.
All right, let's turn now to the topic of election integrity. Former President Trump and his running mate J.D. Vance have raised unfounded questions about the election process. Do you trust the voting process, and will you accept the election results this November? Mr. Baumgartner, you have 1:30.
I do trust the election process. I think it could be improved. I certainly will respect the results of the election. I think what's gone on in this state, in this country, unfortunately, is there's been a series of steps that have been taken to reduce folks' trust in elections. And I think it's so important that we rebuild that trust. Even back stemming to the Dino Rossi, Christine Gregoire election, where Dino was ahead on election night and then 3 recounts, and then suddenly enough votes appeared to make Gregoire the governor, there was a certain amount of distrust. And then when folks like Washington State Congresswoman Carmela objected to President Trump being elected in 2016, that trust elected a little bit more. It's important to me that we restore that trust. What I would like to see be done, if it could be done, was to return to same-day voting. I think that brings a tremendous amount of civic pride to folks, and people would have more trust than the current process. But that would take action by our legislature. So in the meantime, we have to do as much as we can to secure elections. One thing that we should all do right now is show ID to get to vote. If you have to show ID to get into Costco or show ID to get an airplane, well, what's the most important thing you do in society is show ID to vote. That would be a simple measure if Republicans and Democrats could come together on it, which would help restore trust in elections.
Thank you. Ms. Conroy, you have 1:30 as well.
I find it incredibly ironic when people whose very words undercut trust in the election system say that they have to deny people access to the vote in order to restore trust to the election system. We, as American citizens, do not have to buy our way into our right to vote the way that we do if we buy a Costco membership or a ticket on an airplane. And how we vote, how we approach the polls, that is a states' rights issue. And the citizens of Washington State have decided that they want to be able to vote by mail, that everybody gets to vote by mail. And so for my opponent to suggest that somehow the system's so broken that we have to return to the expense and inconvenience of bringing people together to vote, and that in order to do so they're going to have to get an identification of a particular type, this is voter suppression, and I would not support voter suppression. It's a states' rights issue. Washingtonians love to be able to vote by mail, and we do in fact have close elections. I happen to think that the race for this seat is going to be a close election this year, and I'm looking forward to seeing those ballots come in, and we can gather and spend times and watch the returns with our friends, and I'm looking forward to do that too.
Thank you. Quickly and in 15 seconds, if you could tell us, would you have voted to certify the 2020 election results? Mr. Baumgartner?
Yes.
Thank you. Ms. Conroy?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
All right, we want to get now back to another community question.
This next one comes from Kurt Holmes, the vice chairman for the Kalispel Tribe of Indians. Let's take a listen.
As a federally recognized Indian tribe, the Kalispel Tribe is a sovereign government that works really hard to provide opportunities and provide services that uplift our tribal members as well as the local community. What are your plans for partnering with and creating opportunities in your congressional district, not only with the Kalispel Tribe, but with other sovereign Indian tribes on some very important issues such as co-managing natural resources, promoting economic development, as well as addressing the opioid epidemic?
Ms. Conroy, you have 1:30 to answer the question.
Thank you. When I've been up to visit voters up in Conroy County, people tell me every time I go up there how much they appreciate the contributions to the community that the Kalispel Tribe has made, that the casinos, the restaurants, the hotels have provided job opportunities and entertainment opportunities and communities to build community that they greatly respect and appreciate. So we are blessed here in the Northwest to have the presence of so many sovereign nations, an opportunity to learn from indigenous knowledge about our lands, about the resources here, about how we can find ways to heal the land as well as our illnesses. And so working with the tribes, making sure that we meet our sovereign treaty obligations, including by finding ways to improve the Snake River dams to ensure that salmon runs can be reestablished and be made sustainable. That's an important federal investment, and I would look forward to being able to work with sovereign nations in our district to be able to make that happen.
Thank you. Mr. Baumgartner, you have 1:30 as well.
Well, thank you. Stemming from my 8 years in the state Senate, I've had significant experience working with the tribes here in the Northwest, and I'm pleased to be not only supported by the Kalispel, but also the Spokane Indian Tribe and the Colvilles and the Yakima tribe have all supported my campaign. So I appreciate that. One area where we really need to work together is on forest health. And so I'm the son of a WSU forestry professor, and there are so many timberlands on our tribal reservations that we need to work with them in partnership. And some of their forest management practices are actually better than what's going on right now on our U.S. Forest Service land. So forest health will be a big area where we can work together. Certainly anyone that's been through the Airway Heights and the West Plains has seen the tremendous amount of economic development that has gone, that both the Kalispel tribe and the Spokane tribe both have contributed to. So we'll be working on those issues. And then access for health care on tribal areas is very important. We've seen disproportionate burdens on in lower health care outcomes in some tribal areas, and that's a very important role for Congress to work on to make sure that there's doctors in those areas as well too. I was so pleased with the development of the WSU Medical School that in their rural health model they are sending residents and doctors in training to our tribal areas, and that's something that we'll be supporting in Congress as well too.
Thank you.
Thank you. And a new topic now. In the past few years, wildfires have destroyed hundreds of homes here in eastern Washington and burned hundreds of thousands of acres. We see the devastation, but when it comes to getting federal help, that response has often been slow or in some cases completely denied. So would you support Congress responding to these fires in the same way that it does other natural disasters like hurricanes? Mr. Baumgartner, you have 1:30.
Well, the first thing that Congress needs to do is to claw back some of its regulatory authority from the executive branch and make sure that it's Congress passing laws about what can happen for forest health and not just the executive branch. We do have a really increased fuel load in our Washington State Northwest forests, and we have many folks eager to go to work to harvest that timber, thin out those forests, and reduce the fire danger. So I would prefer to have less fires and work on that issue in addition to working to the response, but I cannot urge enough how important it is to work on those forest health programs. Vaughan Brothers Mill up in the Colville area has had a tremendous program working with the environmental community and the tribes to be able to put the lawsuits aside and have access to those forests to bring down the fire danger. Nobody likes all this smoke in the summer. We all have kids, we have old people, we have folks that suffer from asthma, and it's really ruining our late summers around here to have this much smoke. Now, I have an uncle that was a smoke jumper, another uncle that was in the Forest Service, and I worked 2 summers in the Forest Service, so have been around this issue quite a bit. And when it comes to emergency response, yeah, absolutely. It shouldn't be a bunch of bureaucratic red tape to get a tanker deployed to help drop fire retardant or to get firefighters brought on scene. Absolutely. It's every bit as critical as a hurricane or any other natural disaster, and we'll certainly work hard to make sure that all resources are brought to bear.
Thank you. And Ms. Conroy, you have 1:30. Well,
of course, the Congress is the first among 3 equal branches of government, and the executive branch can't undertake work that the Congress has not authorized and applied money to in order to solve the problem. So if FEMA's not granted the authority to deal with wildfires the way it's granted the authority to deal with hurricanes and floods, then of course FEMA can't take action. So yes, I absolutely would amend FEMA's authorizing authority so that they too could address wildfires as quickly as possible. And then, of course, the Forest Service works in, sort of year-round when there's not a disaster to maintain the forests and try to ensure that those fires don't break out. And certainly, again, referencing back to the question about our indigenous tribes, learning from that ages-old knowledge and incorporating that with modern methods as well as ancient wisdom could be a great way for us to do a better job of managing our forests and dealing with wildfires.
Thank you. And as a follow-up, many experts say that climate change is increasing the intensity as well as the frequency of some natural disasters. Do you agree? And what do you think the federal government's role should be in mitigating climate change? Mr. Baumgartner, you have 1 minute.
Well, we certainly need to have an all-above energy policy, and that includes here in the Northwest our hydroelectric dams, which are carbon-free and provide clean, renewable energy, reliable energy, and provide a vital method of transport for all the wheat that leaves our region and goes to the Pacific Rim. There's a lot of folks that eat our soft white wheat in the form of noodles in the Philippines and Japan, and it relies on those dams to get there. So what the federal government needs to do is continue to maintain those dams. They're not coming out if Congressman Baumgartner is elected, and we'll do everything we can do to invest in those dams. We can actually run more energy through those dams, and we certainly need it. So all of the energy above policy can also include modular nuclear. So every Navy ship has a small nuclear reactor on it, and there's a lot of technology coming out of Hanford and even parts that touch this district that we can support through Congress that can help that energy portfolio as well, too.
All right, thank you. Ms. Conroy, you also have 1 minute.
Thank you. Well, one thing I would do for sure, should I be elected to represent Eastern Washington in Congress, is make sure that the MAGA movement keeps its hands off of the programs that we have in order to keep us aware of climate change, to be able to adapt to it and move forward. Project 2025 would eliminate NOAA altogether, and that's what tells all of us, mariners as well as farmers, what sort of weather is coming our way so that we can prepare for it. Project 2025 would also strip any climate references out of the USDA's funding and take it out of the Farm Bill so that there would be no more climate adaptation research to help farmers figure out how to continue to grow and sustain family farms in light of the change that's coming. And of course, we would have to be sure to do proper research and invest in the Snake River dams and the whole Columbia and Snake River ecosystem to make sure that it is forward focused and can adapt with changes that are coming our way.
Thank you. We want to get now to our final community question of the night. We also want to thank everyone who took the time to submit a question and be a part of this debate.
This next question comes from another high school student here in Spokane.
I'm Allie Johnson, and I'm a student at North Central High School. As post-secondary education costs continue to rise, what is your position on the expansion of student financial aid and loan forgiveness?
Ms. Conroy, you have 1:30.
So it's so great to see kids that are looking forward to further education, to enter the workforce, equip new skills. One of the things that I would like to do is make sure that federal loans and grants are available to students who want to go into apprenticeship programs and two-year degree programs as well as, so trade schools as well as community college, because that assistance shouldn't be available just to kids who want to go to a four-year university. I'd also make sure that our student loan programs are fair to our students. The last several years, we've seen that the contractors who took over collection and record keeping for student loans became actually predatory towards students. We've got a friend out in the Valley who was a candidate for Liberty Lake City Council who's paid back twice as much as he originally owned, and he's still not finished paying off his student loans. So federal student loan debt needs to be structured in a way, just the way that we would help a business. We want to help a young person get started on their career. So yeah, we need to help people invest in themselves, and investing in our children is the best way to invest in our future in a country. So we need to make those terms more reasonable and make all levels of education affordable to young people.
Thank you. And Mr. Baumgartner, you have 1:30.
Well, it's fun to see another question from North Central. My son Roman is having his first violin concert tonight at North Central as we speak. So, Roman, I know you're doing a great job. College is way too expensive, but I don't support unilaterally eliminating college debt. I don't think that's fair to folks that haven't gone to college, or somebody that's a plumber or a blue-collar worker that's working hard to pay back their debts. What I strongly support is bringing down the cost of college for everyone, and that's what we did when I was in the state Senate. I was the vice chair of the Higher Education Committee when we led a record-breaking, first in the nation, reduction of the cost of college by investing in higher education. And when I went to WSU, it was at a price level that you could work a part-time job and do some work in the summer and pay through college without any debt. And that's the price level that it should be for everybody in this country. You know, when I did my master's degree at Harvard, I did have to take out loans. I worked hard and I paid those loans back. But for your BA, I think everyone should have a much lower cost of college. There's been a lot of inflation on college campuses as the federal government has made money available. And they've hired a ton of deans and bureaucrats on college campuses instead of just focusing on education. And there's a certain country club atmosphere on such college campuses as well, too. So you can do a lot to reduce the price of college and the cost of college, but we should look at the price tag of college, because the problem with an 18-year-old is they don't know the difference between $600 in debt and $60,000 in debt, and they've never had a job and have to pay it back. So it's absolutely unfair to put kids in so much debt when they go through college.
Thank you. On to our next topic. Data from the CDC found that gun violence is now the leading cause of death in children. How do we reverse that trend while still respecting the Second Amendment? And if you could offer specifics, I'd appreciate that. Mr. Baumgartner, you go first. You have 1:30.
Yeah, that data is very alarming, and it primarily deals with children as defined as under 18-year-olds, and it's primarily an issue, an increase in suicide. And so, you know, there's a mental health crisis in America. It has been made much, much worse since the COVID lockdowns and the isolation that took place and the stagnation and reopening the American community. Too many folks and too many kids are just spending time on their phone looking at TikTok and then going home and being isolated and watching Netflix rather than doing community activities. So the mental health aspect, the community building aspect is extremely important when it comes to that suicide rate. I don't think there's anything more terrifying to a parent of kids than thinking that there might be gun violence at their school. We have taken steps both in the legislature and even as the Treasurer's Office. We've done loans to help our schools do things like single point of entry and harder targets and safer within the schools. And there's some continued things we can do there. We also need to do a better job of prosecuting the gun laws that are already on the books. Very frequently right now, straw purchases that are made to, felons are prohibited from having guns, but often felons get guns because laws aren't enforced through straw purchase processes. So we can do some things there as well, too. But there's no silver bullet on those issues. But with respect to the children, it really is a mental health issue. Thank you.
Ms. Conroy, you have 1:30 as well.
Yeah. When I was a deputy prosecutor, I became aware that for some people living even in Spokane County, our most populous county in the district, some people, if they hear a noise out on their property at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning on a random Tuesday, they're 2 to 3 hours away from the nearest law enforcement. So I understand that guns are a tool for many people, that they need to protect their families and their property. When I was on my way to Afghanistan the second time, when my friends at the 1st Special Forces Battalion found out that I wasn't going to be carrying a weapon, that I would be relying on security personnel to protect me, they gave me weapons training. And every day, even with these men who were in the profession of arms, every single day when we started that range, we started with safety briefings and made sure that everybody knew what the rules of the range were and that everybody was going to follow those. Unfortunately, the National Rifle Association, which at one time was basically a gun safety organization to make sure that people who wanted to retain guns for hunting and to protect their homes and family, has become a gun lobbyist organization. And so we need to close loopholes to prevent violent offenders from getting access to weapons, make things like the red flag law available nationwide, and stop things like bump stocks, which unfortunately my opponent says that he thinks ought to be available to everybody.
Thank you. A follow-up now. Do you support a ban or any regulation on AR-style rifles that are often used in mass shootings, including school shootings? Mr. Baumgartner, you have a minute.
I don't support a ban on those type of rifles. They have the same functionality as any other type of rifle. They have a different aesthetic look, but the basic function of utilizing a firearm, they have the same function as any other gun. So I'm a strong supporter of our Second Amendment. Here in Eastern Washington, we enjoy our rural way of life, and that means being able to go out and hunt for many of us, and it also means personal security, and it certainly means the right to own a firearm.
Thank you. Ms. Conroy, you also have a minute.
Mark, may I ask you to repeat the question,
yes,
please?
Yes, of course. Do you support a ban or any regulations on AR-style rifles that are often used in mass shootings, including school shootings?
I do. I think that it's really unfortunate that President Trump passed an executive order that would have prohibited the sale of bump stocks, which was an accessory to a semi-automatic weapon that made it essentially function as a fully automatic weapon, so that people not defending their homes, not hunting in any sense of the term like we would normally use, people who were trying to kill as many human beings as possible, like the terrible shooting in Las Vegas, are the only people who are using weapons like that. So I would like to see restrictions along the lines of making sure that people know what they're doing, that they have a license to carry, and that they will properly maintain and secure that weapon so that it can't be used to commit a massacre.
Thank you.
Our next topic, the United States has provided billions of dollars to both Ukraine and to Israel, but polls have shown that Americans are divided on that spending. Do you support spending on the two fronts, and would you vote in favor of continued financial support? Ms. Conroy, you have 1:30.
I would vote in favor of continuing support, and there is, of course, a connection between the Russian invasion in Ukraine and the October 7th, 2023 attack by Hamas on Israel. Russia and Iran and other challenges to a peaceful and democratic free market world order are trying to harass the United States into abandoning its allies and its partners. And we just cannot let them win. Our partners, like in South Korea, in Japan, in Taiwan, are all watching to see whether we have the resolve to stand with our partners while they defend themselves from attacks, from invasion and from terrorist attacks. We do need to hold our partners accountable and encourage them to to stay within the laws of armed conflict. And we should be working for peace in the Middle East and trying to find a bilateral ceasefire and the return of the hostages to their families.
Thank you, Mr. Baumgartner. You have 1:30.
Yeah, well, I think it is both very important that Vladimir Putin be unsuccessful in what he's doing in Ukraine, and vitally important that Hamas and Hezbollah be very unsuccessful in what they're attempting to do with Israel. So am strong supporters of both issues. I would say is extremely appropriate to have a lot of concern about the amount of money that has gone to Ukraine and how it is being spent. I think one of the things that we need to do is look at a robust inspector general looking at that funding that's going to Ukraine. We had inspector generals put into place both for the amount of money we were spending in Iraq and the amount of money that was going into Afghanistan, and so that taxpayers can have assurances that it's not being wasted. I think when you look at the Ukraine border region now, which is a bit of a stalemate. There's action on both sides, but it's frustrating when Americans are sending our hard-earned tax dollars to Ukraine, and you see a lot of folks in Kiev that are going to nightclubs and not stepping forward to serve. So I think we need to continue to call on our Ukrainian allies to make sure they're robustly prosecuting that war. But I don't want Russian troops on the Polish border, and I don't want my kids fighting for World War III. And when it comes to Israel, it is absolutely necessary and vital that not only Hamas and Hezbollah be defeated, but that the Iranian regime that is supporting so much nonsense and dangerous nonsense in that region, but the Iranian regime be put on notice that America is not going to tolerate that as well, too.
Thank you. Our next topic is health care. A recent study found about half of U.S. adults say it's difficult to afford health care costs, with 40% having debt due to medical or dental bills. How would you make it, or what would you do rather, to make healthcare more affordable? Mr. Baumgartner, you'll go first. You have 1:30.
Well, it's a huge issue for the American economy. It's a huge issue for every family. We all spend a lot on health care. It's a tremendously big part of our national economy. And a lot of us, like including myself, we have parents that are in their golden years that are consuming a lot of health care services. So we talked a little bit earlier in our discussion tonight about what I've done to support increasing the amount of doctors, particularly in rural areas, because rural health is so important. And when it comes to the cost side, one of the crazy things about health care is that nobody knows what they're paying when they go in to consume the service. There's not price transparency. And what Obamacare attempted to do was look at, there were kind of two challenges. One was access and the other was cost. And Obamacare sought to deal with the access issue before the cost issue. And so instead of fixing that cost issue first, we have a bigger system that continues to, that's a somewhat broken system. So we'll support price transparency. The low-hanging fruit in healthcare is wellness. If you're doing things to take care of yourself, you should pay less in healthcare costs and not subsidize people that are making unhealthy decisions. So wellness is where we could really save a lot of costs. And then price transparency, so that the next time you go into your doctor and you're deciding how much you're going to spend, you know what it costs, and then maybe have systems set up like health savings accounts so you can actually roll into a retirement account or into your pocket a smarter, better healthcare decision. So it is extremely important, and it's going to become even more important as Americans' population continues to get older.
Thank you. Ms. Conroy, you have 1:30.
Thank you. Well, I'd certainly like to see the Affordable Care Act expanded so that anybody who doesn't have a job or a job that pays enough money for them to get employer-provided health care be able to get access to a good healthcare insurance that covers pre-existing conditions and make sure that people who have chronic conditions like diabetes have access to the coverage that they need. We can also make sure that labor unions have full support and workers have the right to organize for better conditions, including access to employer-funded health care. Another thing that we could do, we have the Reserve Officer Training Program for people who are willing to pledge to go into the military and serve our country for 6 years in uniform as military officers. We should also have a civilian doctor training program so that doctors, instead of having to go hundreds of thousands of dollars into debt in order to acquire medical education, let's pay for that education right up front and let them sign up to serve for 6 years in a rural healthcare system or in a lower income healthcare district so that we can bump up the number of people who can afford to be general practitioners and serve the needs of the general population where those needs are most deeply felt. And that would include all across rural Eastern Washington.
Thank you. A quick follow-up regarding the Affordable Care Act. Mr. Baumgartner, this goes to you first. You'll have 15 seconds. Would you vote to repeal the Affordable Care Act if that's brought up in Congress?
No, I wouldn't, and I don't think it's a realistic policy right now. We have to work within the parameters of the Affordable Care Act to improve the system.
Ms. Conroy, the same question to you.
Mark, I would definitely not repeal the Affordable Care Act. I think that it's important. The Republicans, especially the MAGA movement in Congress, have tried repeatedly to repeal the Affordable Care Act with barely a concept of a plan to replace it. That's got to stop.
Thank you.
When it comes to Social Security, there are a lot of concerns about its long-term financial solvency. So what changes would you make to protect the program's future while also protecting the needs of seniors today? Ms. Conroy, you have 1:30.
Before the Affordable Care Act came along, I remember my parents talking about how lucky they felt compared to their friends. My dad was a union railroader for 43 years, and so he had a pension through the railroad and health care through the railroad. My dad was also an NCO in the Air National Guard right here in Spokane, and that meant that my parents had access to TRICARE health care after he retired, and their friends who hadn't had good union work or hadn't served in the military just did not have the coverage that they needed to get through, and so they were completely reliant on Social Security and Medicare. So one thing that we could do to fund Social Security would be to scrap the cap Right now, people who make more than $168,000 odd dollars don't pay on their income above that. So if we scrap the cap, people would be paying, very high income earners would be paying more into the system. That would keep it solvent for the foreseeable future. So it might not be easy to pass through Congress, but that's certainly something that I'd like to work on. At the very least, we should significantly raise the cap. But my going-in position would be scrap it altogether.
Thank you, Mr. Baumgartner. You have 1:30.
Yeah, thank you. Well, Social Security is very important. I have two parents in their 80s, and, as the treasurer of Spokane County, I hear from seniors all the time. In fact, we run senior coffee with the treasurer on a monthly basis where folks can gather in my office, and it's so important and useful for me to hear directly from our senior citizens, both about the challenges they have and about their knowledge and their stories. So I enjoy working a lot with seniors, and many of them are very concerned about all costs. The cost of groceries going up, and the cost of housing, the cost of property taxes as they continue to skyrocket in our area, and they're worried they can't stay in their homes. So it is vital that they have that secure Social Security safety net. Now, there's a big difference between myself and my opponent on this issue when it comes to scrapping the cap. As she says, that would be one of the biggest tax increases in American history if you were to eliminate that threshold. That's not something I'm looking for in terms of increased taxes, but it is an issue that's going to have to be addressed. I think the best way it's going to be realistically addressed, because it is a hot button issue when it comes election time, is that there's going to have to be a bipartisan commission put together, both Democrats and Republicans, working and looking at the limits and what's going to go on with Social Security and saying, hey, what's a solution that we can all find? So hopefully we can take it out of the hot button political area and make it a policy area. But I certainly don't support eliminating Social Security, nor do I support the biggest tax increase in American history.
All right, thank you very much. We have covered a lot of issues tonight, and we now want to give the candidates one last chance to make their case for your vote.
As with the other questions that we have asked tonight, we want the candidates to tell us about their experience and vision and why they should represent the 5th Congressional District.
We held a coin flip prior to the start of this debate. Ms. Conroy will give her closing statement first, followed then by Mr. Baumgartner. Ms. Conroy, you have 1 minute.
Thank you so much for this opportunity to address voters across Eastern Washington today. It is a tremendous privilege to be here before you. I thank everyone who voted for me in the primary so that I could be here tonight, and I hope that I convince more people that my experience in the criminal justice system, my experience as a national security professional, qualifies me to represent you in Eastern Washington. It's been a tremendous opportunity to travel the district and talk with people about their hopes and fears for the future. And I want to be able to represent everybody and work across the aisle with anybody who's serious about finding common sense solutions to our challenges. Let's let Michael Baumgartner finish his 2 years remaining in his term as the Spokane County Treasurer. Keep an eye on me. If I don't do what I've said I'm going to do, if I don't keep my promises, take another look at 2026, and Mr. Baumgartner can take another shot at it.
Thank you, Mr. Baumgartner. You have 1 minute.
Well, thank you. I want to start by thanking my opponent, Carmela Conroy, for running for office and being involved in this debate. It's not easy to run for office, and particularly as a first-time candidate stepping forward. And I know she's made a good impression across the district. I also want to thank you as the organizer of this debate. It's very good, actually. Quite candidly, this is our 6th debate that I've done, and I think you guys have asked the best questions. And so, kudos to KREM too. No disrespect to the other folks. Very pleased and honored that we won the primary. Very grateful and hopeful that 5 days from now I'll be elected the next member of Congress. Knock on wood, that happens. And what I just want to really close with is that if those folks if you end up not voting for me, and I am fortunate enough to be your member of Congress, I will be working for you as well too. You will still be my boss. I will be your representative. So even if you didn't vote for me this election and I am able to win, please reach out and consider me your member of Congress, and we'll be doing everything we can to protect the American dream, not just for my 5 kids, but for all the kids and people across Eastern Washington.
Thank you. And thank you to both candidates for joining us tonight for the KREM 2 5th District Congressional Debate. It's now up to Eastern Washington voters to decide who will represent us in Congress.
Election Day is now less than a week away on Tuesday, November 5th. And remember, you do need to return your ballot by 8 p.m. on election night. You can mail it back, or if you would like to find a ballot drop box location near you, we also have that information. It's posted right now on our website. Just go to KREM.com. And if you need to check the status of your ballot or to confirm your voter registration, you can do so by visiting votewa.gov.
If you want more information about the candidates or other issues on the ballot, KREM 2 can help you out. Just text us the word VOTE to 509-448-2000 and we'll text you a link with our comprehensive voter's guide. There you'll find everything you need to know before casting your ballot. If you missed any part of tonight's debate or want to watch it again, it will be available to stream on demand on KREM 2 Plus. If you don't yet have KREM 2 Plus, it's our free streaming channel and you can add it right now on Roku, Fire TV, or Apple TV.
Thank you again to both Michael Baumgartner and to Carmela Conroy for being part of tonight's KREM 2 5th District Congressional Debate. I'm Whitney Ward.
And I'm Mark Hanrahan. We'll see you back here for KREM 2 News at 10 and 11 o'clock tonight.
And be sure to join us on election night because we will bring you the latest results from races all across Washington and Idaho. As soon as the polls close, you'll be able to watch our special coverage exclusively on KREM 2 Plus. Have a good night and don't forget to vote.